This is Shannon Torrance, and this is Magic is Real. In this episode, I interview Alan Wellman. Alan is a psychic medium and a spiritual teacher. I think you'll find this interview very enlightening, as Alan shares what he's learned about neuroscience as it relates to mediumship. If you like this video and want to see more like it, you can help support the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing with like-minded friends, and leaving comments below the video. Thank you so much. And now, here's my conversation with Alan Wellman. Hello, I'm Shannon Torrance, and this is Magic is Real. Today, my guest is Alan Wellman. I became aware of Alan. There he is. He's very dapper as always. I became aware of Alan because I sit in mediumship circles and spiritual services and had the pleasure of watching him read and found him to be very talented, but also very warm, charismatic, and very well dressed with excellent sartorial taste. And so I actually have since been taking some classes with him, and he's also an excellent teacher. So I thought, who better to geek out about spiritual stuff with than Alan? Alan, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. What a warm greeting and invitation. Look, I think I'm blushing.
It matches your flower.
It matches this whole thing, huh?
Yes. So, Alan, I actually don't know much about you personally other than what you're like. So I'd love to start whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure.
Who are you? Where do you come from? And what led you down this path, starting from as far back as you care to go? I'd love to know how you came to become a medium.
Sure. Well, like most people, I think, that do this work, it's been something that's been latent or has been an interest for most of my life. And it was a kind of a tumultuous time that started that soul's natural yearning for something different. So as a kid, I was always interested in kind of magical things, or I remember the TV show The Munsters, and I always loved Grandpa because he was this sorcerer and he had this spell book, and so like I literally had a spiral journal where I would draw symbols of like stars and triangles and things like that because I wanted to do that. But I've always had that intuitive nature about myself. So like I would know things would happen, or I would just predict what was going to happen with people in my life or different things like that. I did have a couple of mediumistic experiences. One time, I have a brother in spirit. I remember when he passed away, and a picture fell off the wall in my bedroom at approximately the same time of his passing. So that kind of physical phenomena has been around with me. I've had other things where you look in the mirror, jump out of the shower, and there's a loved one, their image flashing in the mirror, and like, oh, how dare you walk in on a lady taking a bath, you know? So those types of things had happened to me, and then I've always been in spiritual and interested. I've had an interest in spirituality and knowing more about what is God and what is the soul, what is the spirit. So that took me on a couple of courses of study in different spiritual traditions. And for a while, and I'm a musician by trade, quote unquote, by trade. So I'm a music teacher, but I'm also a church musician. So I've had 20 years of working in churches and in different capacities, doing music and spirituality married together. But none of it really kind of felt like it fit. And so I like my doctorate's in sacred music, but it's in a different context of mediumship and kind of new thought spirituality, which is where my current interest is. And it was several years ago where I remember in waking up and just knowing, having that still small voice inside saying, "You're going to lose your job this year," and it was like, I don't know about that. And I thought, well, maybe I'm making it up, and I don't want to have a self-fulfilled prophecy here, so I'm going to just kind of do what I do. And there were a series of reversals, as David Copperfield says in the Charles Dickens classics, where there are a series of reversals where I had lost some of like a church job, I had lost a relationship, I'd lost my main teaching job, all within about 8 months of each other, 9 months. And so it really was the soul crying out, for something else. And it's in that vulnerability, in that moment of despair, that the soul just cries help. And so within a very short time, I I think I had 3 days to kind of have a pity party, and then I got rolled up my sleeves and I just set out to the universe. I said, all right, I'm open to go wherever. And I remember hearing about a little town in outside of Los Angeles, and called Pasadena. You may have heard of it, the Rose Bowl, and all sorts of goodness there. And so I thought, oh, I know about Pasadena. So it actually brought me out here for work. So I came out here, and then I remember it was January. I had been here for a couple of years, and it was January, and it was around New Year's. And I thought, oh, well, last year was a wild ride. Let's see what this year has. And I did, as one does. We go on to YouTube and Google, and we look at horoscope predictions and astrology for my star sign for the upcoming year. And there was one woman that I listened to, and she just had this way about her. I mean, I probably listened to about 15 recordings that week. And there was one woman who I just really jived with, and I said, oh, so I booked a reading with her, and she uploaded a video, and it was a psychic reading with the cards. And she started to say, you're psychic, right? And you should be doing this work. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. I've been told that. And I did, as one does. I got on the computer again, and I went on to Google, looking up psychic classes Los Angeles. And the first thing that came up was a beginning mediumship class. And I thought, well, that's not really psychic classes, but let me look at it. So I click on it, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, oh, this is Sunday. I think it was like a Thursday when I saw this ad. I said, this is on Sunday. I'll sign up. So I go through, fill in all my stuff, and I look, and not only was it 3 days away, but it was literally around the corner from my apartment. And so I'm like, okay, I see you, Spirit.
Yeah.
And so I walk in, I introduce myself. I say, hey, I'm Alan. I'm one of the students. And the instructor just stopped me. She said, you're a medium, right? And you need to be doing this work. I said, no, tell me more.
Yeah.
So it was like two kind of affirming voices that said, hey, get into this work. And so that started my unfoldment. I did some mentorships with that woman. I've been to the Arthur Findlay College for several, probably half a dozen, 8 times, 6, 8 times. I've had some wonderful mentorships over the last few years, and it's been just this evolving situation. And so now um, I demonstrate regularly. About once a month, I'll do a demonstration. I'm working through the SNU, the Spiritualist National Union, to become accredited and get their certificate in demonstrating and speaking on the platform. So if I go to a spiritualist church, I can do that. And it's just been wonderful. And now I'm in a place where I can actually give back to students such as yourself, the things and the lessons that I've learned along the way. And so it's a continuum. It's a continuum.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's so similar, I mean, to I think a lot of people, but I had kind of it took everything falling apart for me to kind of seek answers as well.
Yeah.
Being, I mean, not to be, it was dramatic for me, but being a voice actor and developing reflux from a gastrointestinal disorder that took my voice for 2 years, that I'm still recovering from. I had worked my whole life to be an actor. And
Mm.
I struggled, and I was, never making enough money to pay the bills, but I wanted to do this. And finally, in later life, I suddenly, here I am doing it, and I'm making all this money, and I love my life. And then it just all came to a halt, like 3 years in. And it was, somebody said to me, if you could be anything else, what would you want to be? And I said, a medium, but that's not going to happen. I bought the story that you had to be, that it was the
Wonderful.
gift,
Hmm.
that you had to be born that way. But through everything falling apart, I started listening to people, reading books, YouTube videos, and finding out that that wasn't true.
Right.
And I didn't realize that you could learn it, or that you already know it. You're born with it.
Right. Yeah.
But you you either don't believe in it, you don't choose to do it, you're not aware of it, but all you have to do, and some people aren't meant to be mediums, but we're all capable of that connection. It's about, but we've been so programmed by billboards and lights and media, and just our attention is taken elsewhere to the logical brain. And so, what I wanted to ask you in that regard too is, how did you go? Because I know I've seen my own abilities grow as I've studied, and it's incredible, to the point where sometimes I'm blown away. I'm like, I can't believe that happened. But I'd love to know what your kind of breakthrough moment was, when you started, from the time that you decided, I'd like to pursue this and see where it goes. Do you remember a particular, or maybe not even particular, but some kind of, like, when did you start to feel like, oh yeah, this is happening? Was it for you right away? Did it just take a lot of practice? When did you become confident enough where you can get up there and demonstrate and not worry that, oh, today I'm off? Or maybe you still worry, but
I think that uh, it takes well, it took me about 9 months, I would say, to really feel consistent, where 80 to 90% of the time the information was accurate. Now, I I kind of jumped in head first into the deep end with this mediumship. So I was reading books, I was watching videos on YouTube, I did the mentorship with a woman here for about those 9 months. I was also um, learning from online courses with James Van Prague and Gordon Smith, um, and so it took me probably a good 9 months to really feel confident, like, okay, I'm not just a hack, I'm not
yeah,
just making it up, I actually can do this. And I feel that most people, if they dedicate themselves to the practice, to the theory, to the understanding, and to keep in mind that we want to be of service, we want to be helpful in this work. I think that 9 to 12 month range is a fairly common target for people, and it's also a lot of unlearning a lot of bad habits. It's there are lots of bad habits, and it doesn't help that um, there are so many television personalities or radio personalities that are on demonstrating, or they're walking up to strangers, or you have this sweaty boy drawing pictures, and
I love
um,
Tyler Henry.
is that his name? The
Yes.
sweaty boy. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I just know that that's sensationalized.
Right.
It's not realistic, and so people, I think, get discouraged, and especially beginners get discouraged because they feel, well, Henry, or
Yeah.
whatever, whoever it is that they're watching, doesn't have to do that, but they don't realize that they're seeing many, 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 oftentimes hours or of footage um, that has been edited together. And so the difficulty for someone starting out on this path um, is staying focused and staying dedicated and not getting discouraged by either getting a no, or bringing something in that the sitter can understand. It really does take time, and just like every skill that we've ever learned in our life, at first it was hard. At
Hmm.
first, we probably failed miserably,
Yeah.
but through repetition, through guidance, through support and encouragement, I think someone who has never done this before can actually um, can develop the skills necessary to make these connections.
Yeah, I actually read the Long Island Medium's book. Love her. I've watched every single season of her show. Um, Not since I started developing though, so I'm interested to see how I feel about it now.
Right.
But she said in her book, and she read her own book on Audible. She said, "Do you think I woke up just reading spirits? No way." She's like, "I studied. I sat in circles.
Yep.
Just she's like." She said her teacher, she's like, my teacher was like, "You're ready." And I said, "No way." And now, she is one of the world's most recognized
Right.
psychic
Totally.
mediums. Yeah. And when you say there are a lot of habits that we need to break out of, what are some of them?
I think some of them are self-doubt is a big one, and our brains are wired that way our brains are wired, so one half of the brain is saying all those negative things. I can't do this. I'm
Mhm.
going to look a fool. This is crazy. And the other parts, yeah, you got this. You got you're the best at this. Keep going. So we have to constantly turn the negative out and listen to the loud one. Another bad habit I see in mediumship is not understanding how your power works, how your energy works. So that's why we sit in the power. That's why we learn to meditate. That's why we learn to just kind of quiet the mind and just become aware of what we're aware of.
Mhm.
So that kind of unlearning has to happen. And then, of course, there is also um, our 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 self saboteur, as RuPaul would call it, the self saboteur that is going to find what your weakest link is and magnify it far
Mhm.
far greater than it actually is. And so what we have to do is we have to sit to be quiet. We have to sit to understand our power. We have to recognize what is us and what is not. And when I say us, I mean our soul. And then I feel like this is an often overlooked element in developing mediums, is the the aspect of spirituality is often overlooked, because I really do feel like mediumship or the psychic phenomenon are not enough to sustain oneself doing this work. It's great when it happens, absolutely, but the old spiritualist teachers, and Emma Britton, for instance, she often worried that in spiritualism, the phenomenon would outweigh and take center stage over the actual connection of your soul to the divine, to source, to spirit, whatever you want to call it. And so that's something that I think the term these days is called spiritual bypass,
Mhm.
when people just think, oh, I don't have any issues. I can just go and do this phenomenon, but not really look at themselves at and it goes back to that self-saboteur, right? We have to get rid of that self-saboteur by getting to know thyself, by getting to know the connection of your spirit and to the universal consciousness, universal mind, spirit, whatever you want to call for it. I find that that is an element that is often missing from from mediumship development.
Yeah, and what are some ways that you can connect with that again, or find that in yourself? I know that you did say meditation, um, but what are some other thoughts that you have about that?
Meditation's one way. I
Mhm.
think that's probably the easiest, and it isn't. It's fascinating because meditation doesn't have to be for an hour several times a day. There are some neurologically proven ways to get the benefits of meditation without doing that. And I can talk about some of that a little bit later. But then there's also the idea of serving someone else, doing something for someone else. And I'm not saying you have to become Mother Teresa, but you can do something like something simple uh, there's a lot of snow in the Midwest right now. Something simple like shoveling someone's driveway, or here in LA, it's been windy here. So what would it look like to sweep the sidewalk or to sweep the driveway of your neighbor? Little things like that, because when you actually start to do those things for others, when you do something for someone else, there's this heartedness, this heart-centered way of being where you're connecting with another person. So giving to someone else, being of service. Another way is find a community of like-minded people. And in this age of COVID, there are so many Facebook groups, there are so many meetups, there are so many classes being done online. I really do believe that that is an essential part of tapping into the spirituality. Because when you do that, you see, you realize that you're not alone. You never were alone. That the connection of spirit through one another is just magnified. And when you are part of a group of, whether it be a class or your own circle, and if you have a spouse that's into this, that's great, or a partner, that's even better. But I feel like the connection, the community is essential, for helping to reconnect with your own soul, to source, to God, to spirit, capital S, whatever you
Right.
want to call it. There are many, many ways that we can do that, but it really does take, it takes effort. It takes mindfulness, being aware at that moment. And it does take a little bit of vulnerability. We must be vulnerable if we want to really help others see that they're not alone. And in this work, it's all about being vulnerable, is it not?
It
And
completely is.
it really is. And because you see, the sitter, our clients, they're being vulnerable. They're coming to us saying, I've lost one of my most precious resources. Can you help me feel them? Can you give me insight that they would bring forward? Can you give me some upliftment? And that is, how can you not be vulnerable when someone comes and bears it all for you?
That is so beautifully said. One of the gifts of COVID for me personally has been that exact thing. I've joined all these spiritual circles. I started this YouTube channel, and even on Instagram, finding all these little whenever someone says I'm doing a event tonight, I jump in on it and I meet all these new people. And now I feel like I've actually been more social during COVID via Zoom
Right.
than I've ever been in my life meeting new people, because as a developing medium, part of the work is practice. And so at least once a week, I do a reading for somebody who sits, and I practice my mediumship on them. And I always say we'll reserve an hour. And every single one of them has gone 2 to 3 hours,
Wow.
not in just the reading, but first of all, the reading kind of can go on for, I mean, left to my own devices, I can just keep going. But then they've shared all this personal information. And then
Right.
there's a connection there. And then we just start talking about our lives and our spiritual paths, because these are people from other mediumship classes. So
Yep.
they're all, and it's actually, I've bonded more with people than I have ever. And I think you're
Nice.
right. It's that connection that's so incredible. And also, think what spirit wants for us is to realize that we are all spirit and we are all connected.
Absolutely.
Um, so that's beautiful. Now, something interesting that I'd love to discuss with you is I've watched Tyler Henry, Matt Frazier, the Long Island Medium, and I believe Monica the Medium, who's one of my teachers. Um, Best class. I can highly recommend that class. And all of them, I believe, had electrodes placed on their brain to see what happens to their brain waves, while they're channeling, while they're connecting with the other side. Some have shown, some of the studies have shown, wow, your brain looks almost like you were in a car accident, or not any of those particular people, but I've heard this. It almost looks like you've had brain trauma. There's a different part of their brain that's more expanded than another.
Hmm.
Or the Long Island medium's result was you're in a meditative state all the time, which you would be surprised to hear since she's so
Right.
hyperactive. But in fact, her brain is able to stay in whatever theta state or whatever it is,
Right.
even while she's having anxiety and doing all the things she does. So, you, I know, have been researching a lot of the brain as it relates to mediumship and vice versa. So, I'd love to hear your findings and your insight about
Sure.
that.
Well, um, I'll start just going back a little bit.
Yeah.
So, one of probably the most influential books I've read has been How God Changes Your Brain. So, this is written by Andrew Newberg and Mark Waldman. Andrew Newberg is at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm not trying to push them or anything like that, but this has been
You
like
already have. I'm reading that book.
influential book. And Mark Waldman is at Loyola Marymount here in LA. So I began reading it, and I was just like, whoa, whoa. And then I came across an article that Mark Waldman wrote for the Science of Mind magazine. And it had to do with the new approaches of brain science and what neurology is discovering, especially about how the brain works. So the brain doesn't, it used to, you may have heard, I'm more left brained or I'm more right brained. And that has more or less gone to the wayside. And they used to focus so much more on the actual the structure of the brain, like the parietal lobes or the dorsal, prefrontal dorsal lobes, or different aspects of the brain, the amygdala and so forth. Well, by looking at the structure, we are isolating very individualized units of the way the brain works. And so they're actually beginning to recognize that there are these networks. And so the networks are all these dendrites, all these little brain wires that are sent out, and they work in tandem with each other. But they're also very unique because it's difficult to work in more than one mindfully. So I, that's the first little bit I want to talk about, is just the brain networks, because this is really interesting. Now, Waldman, the professor at Loyola Marymount, he is really working on this idea called TIMS: thinking, imagination, motivation, um, uh, emotion, and salience. So, not TIMS, times. And so, what he's discovering is that those five networks of the brain, they work beautifully uh, in tandem with each other, but it's extraordinarily difficult to work simultaneously. And so there's an aspect of the mind, of the brain, that's called, that is the imagination network, for instance. The imagination network is the part of the brain where our imagination is, where thoughts, anxiety comes from. When we have an idea for something, it's coming through that aspect. But what happens is that then we start thinking, and we're using those frontal lobes. We start thinking about those thoughts, and then we're focused on that. But when you're thinking on something like that, you're not really open up to the other networks of the mind, because you're thinking so much about that. Well, how's that going to work? And so we actually shut the different networks down. And what we have to begin to do is do this dance between the networks. Now, Andy Newberg and Mark Waldman, they've done studies on mediums where they have hooked them up to fMRI machines, or they've had the electrodes that have been done, and it's very, very interesting. some of the data that they have actually begun to produce. Um, it may be helpful if I can actually show some graphics. May I share my screen?
Yes, please.
All right. So the brain researchers have recently, in the last, I'd say 7 to 10 years especially, really spent a lot of time looking at mediums. And this is out of a study with the Institute of Noetic Science in Petaluma, California, and we also have the Woodbridge Institute in Tucson, Arizona. I'll put the citation, um, well, I'll give you the citation, Shannon, so you can put the link so that if a viewer wants to go and research it and they can read it. So in this experiment, we had the researchers put mediums and controls with the electronic trodes on their head. And so when we look at it, they were given 4 prompts. If you can see the red, red means there's lots of blood activity. So the mind is very active. And as you get to blue, there's almost no activity going on. So you're just in that kind of blissful awareness, relaxed, mindful awareness state. And then the different colors, yeah, it's just like the reverse rainbow, right? And as you get closer to red, there's more activity. So what had happened was they took these mediums and they gave them 4 prompts. First, they said, all right, do your thing. Let's hear you. Let's see what happens with your brain as you're doing your mediumship. And so if you'll notice that the left side of the diagram here, which is reversed, right? So this would be the left and this is the right of the patient. It's reversed when we look at these diagrams. So this side, there's more green, and the left side is more red. But what was interesting is then they said, can you create a story, make something up? And then look at the change. We have the exact reverse
Wow.
of what happened. Then they asked the mediums to recall a memory. So we just have the stuff in the frontal lobes lighting up because they're thinking, they're focusing, they're trying to understand, they're trying to get the details right. But when they got to a complete relaxed state, what they called perception, and this is done in what's known as the salience network. It's the area of the mind where we become aware. It's the area of intuition. It's the area of emotion that is being activated. So before they started the mediumship, they brought him back and they measured what was the brain activity, and then they did it again. And I just thought it was so fascinating to look at the changes of what parts of the brain were active and what were more passive, and just fascinating. And
Yeah.
so the the prompts would go clockwise. So we start in neutral, we would do the storytelling, we'd recall a memory, we become aware, we begin the mediumship. Now, I want you to especially pay attention to this perception area, because that happens in the network of the brain called the salience area. So I want to go ahead and just share my screen again. So if you look, remember I said those networks of the brain? Well, the salience network would be this green area. And this is the imagination part, that thick yellow part. That's what we would call the default brain network, the default mode there. And that's just the imagination's really going. So this image is actually from above the head. So you can see these areas that are on the side, and that's kind of the salience network there in the green.
Hmm.
And then over here, this is from behind. So these are 3 images, same brain, just different versions. This is from behind, this is from above, and this is from the side. So this is where your eyes and nose are. They'd be down here.
Okay.
Well, what's interesting here, so I mentioned Waldman using this times in your brain. So we have the imagination, that was that thick yellow part in the brain. And then the frontal lobes, which is the thinking. That's also where we consider the conscious mind is of the person. That's where they're aware of what's going on around them. There's what's known as the salience or the special, but the salience aspect is the part that gets our awareness. We become aware there. And it's all connected here in the middle in that salient aspect. Motivation and, of course, emotion. Now, what's interesting, remember I said we can be in the thinking or the imagination, but not really. So we have to think of almost like almost a gauge. If we're too far in the imagination, we're often detached from reality. We're not really paying attention. We're daydreaming all the time. But if we're thinking all the time, we can actually develop a little bit of brain burnout. This is what happens when you're working on a job and you can only think about that constantly and your mind gets tired. Well, that's because you're spending too much time in that thinking part, the frontal lobes. So we have to learn to relax that. And meditation is one way to help allow our minds to relax. But an even simpler and an even more remarkable way is is a what has been deemed a mindful yawn. A mindful yawn. It sounds so simple, but what happens is when you yawn, you neutralize all of these networks of the brain so that you can actually become at center. Many prayer practices often begin with a centering breath, right?
Yeah.
And what you're doing is you're pausing, you're bringing the air in, and you just allow the networks to reset themselves. Now, I'm going to invite our audience to do it with us. And we're going to take 3 mindful yawns. And I'm just going to have my little bell ringing. So when you hear the bell, I just want you to feel free to take the breath so that your awareness is on the bell and on the yawn. And we're just going to take it and just become aware of what your body is doing. So let's take a breath together or a yawn together.
Yeah.
Most people will feel a sense of clearing the mind, of relaxation, of just maybe not even feeling their body. Some people will have no effect, but most people will take those 10 seconds and just become aware of how they're feeling. So Shannon, how would you describe for yourself? How did that feel?
I feel very calm,
Okay.
very centered, and um and actually energized.
Okay, good. Good. Let's take another one.
Okay.
And notice what happens and then we'll just feel.
Yeah.
What do you notice?
I feel very buzzy in my head.
Okay.
It's a tingly feeling in my scalp.
All right. Most people will feel even more relaxed, more centered,
Yeah.
almost floaty.
I do feel floaty.
And let's take one more breath together and just experience what happens. Even if you can't yawn, just take a low deep breath. How would you describe that feeling?
Well, besides my eyes watering, I feel very focused to the point where I started to hear sounds outside of the house that I wasn't previously aware of.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. Most people, after that third breath, will get into that point where it's almost suspension of
Mhm.
everything outside of them.
Yeah,
You
it's
can do it.
expanded awareness in a way. And yet tuning out a lot of things that are right in front of me.
Yes, yes, exactly. So when I read about this, again, this is Waldman's article, and when I read this, there was this penny drop moment where it's just like, this is what needs to happen in mediumship.
Mhm.
We, and this is Mark Waldman's slide here. So what he showed here was this awareness area, and what happens is, as a medium, what do we say when we start? We almost always say, I'm aware of.
Mhm.
And then we use our clairs. I feel, I know, it makes me feel happy. I feel like her emotions were, she was depressed, or she was joyful, or she was grumpy, whatever the sensation is. But what happens is mediums get stuck in understanding or explaining what they receive. So
Absolutely.
what happens is the medium gets stuck in this thinking part.
Mhm.
And what they really need to do is they need to recalibrate and get to that center. Now, this is all done in the mind. Now, if even though it's been a minute or so since we did that last breath, I bet if you thought about it and you replayed the sensations in your mind, you could probably get to that relaxed state of awareness.
Mhm.
And then you could probably do a reading very, very easily. So I bring this because this for me has been a game changer. This has been a game changer because what uh, what this tells us is that we have to often become aware. The salience gets the information. It's attached to an emotion. We allow it in the imagination to ruminate. We spit it out, but then we have to go back to neutral to receive the next bit and pass it on. So we don't become, there's an old way of thinking in mediumship about the letter carrier. We don't write the letter, we
Mhm.
don't read the letter, we just deliver the letter, right? And so what happens is, in so many ways of mediumship, I hear things like, I don't know if it's this, or I wonder what they're doing with it, or I don't know if this is my imagination, or I don't know what this is. And it's because you are spending too much time trying to understand in the thinking part. Now, the opposite can happen too if you don't get validation. What can happen is you can become so engrossed in the imagination
Mhm.
that you create this narrative about a grandmother's knife, but it wasn't a sharp knife. It actually had a dull end, and there's more than one knife, and you see it on the wall, but there's also a chopping block, and I know that there must be blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And you've given 10 sentences, but the sitter has no idea what you're talking about
Yeah.
because you're in that imagination zone,
Was
right?
it in your I think it was your last class where you had us do an exercise where you said, "Don't give any validation." And that
Right.
was the most difficult because, oh, I created a whole story about this woman, who she was, who she hung
But
out
she
with,
was
what she
lovely.
was into. That woman didn't exist. She
She's
existed in my mind. And never have I been more imaginative because normally people will say, "You should write. You're a great writer." And I say, "Oh, I can't create characters. I don't have that." But in mediumship, I've had it work both ways where, either I'm guilty of that thing of saying, I know I'm supposed to say, I know that, I'm aware of, but because I'm still developing, I don't really know, I don't know that. And so I find myself saying, I don't know. I think instead of, sometimes instead of I feel and I know because
Right.
I think I know, but I'm not 100% sure I know yet.
Yeah. Well, what happens is instead you wouldn't necessarily have to say, I think, I feel, I know, I
Yeah.
hear, I sense every statement. But what's more important is getting the validation, getting the sitter involved. Because
Yeah.
remember, it's a three-way.
Mhm.
It's you, it's the sitter, and it's a spirit communicator. So we have to include the sitter in the conversation. And so we do that by hearing their voice, by getting them engaged. I'm not saying let them go on and on and on
Right.
to tell you, but you have to get some validation or
Yeah.
some redirection. So if you're talking about this lovely lady, and it says, oh, I feel she's very motherly. It feels like mother. Would you understand mom in spirit? And you have 50-50 chance, yes or
Mhm.
no, right?
Yeah.
And if you're correct with mom, then the next bit of information. And I feel like she lived a nice long life. Yes. I'm also aware that she worked outside of the home. Yes. And I'm aware of that, I'm aware that she herself was a teacher. Yes. And I know that it wasn't just school kids, but I know that she would have also worked at Sunday school. Yes.
Mhm.
So we are able to build by getting the voice, and it allows the power to manifest and the spirit communicator to come so much closer, rather than just creating this narrative about someone way out there.
Mhm.
They're actually, you begin to feel that. But it takes trust, it takes surrender, it takes involving the person. And when someone's starting out, I mean, half the time people are hesitant because they want to get it right, or
Yeah.
they want to be good, or they want to be impressive, or all
Mhm.
those things I've gone through myself. And so you have to be okay with being wrong,
Yeah.
because I'm from the school of thought that it's the information is always right,
Mhm.
but it's my understanding, my interpretation, my willing it to be something that it's not, that is going to be wrong.
That's true. I had 3 in a row, practice session readings in a row where I was on fire for a week, and I mean, for these 3 weeks, and I thought, "I'm finally consistent. I just wanna get to 10 consistent ones before I'm comfortable saying, 'Yes, I'm a medium and I can do this,'" and I had 3 in a row, and then all of a sudden I got to one where it was like, "No, no, I'm not I don't think so," and I started to deflate a little bit. And then at the last minute, she wrote to me the next day and said, "I spoke with my dad and with my mother, and those things were true. I just didn't know them. This is what he was trying to say," which I know we've all had that happen. And
Right.
then I've had the one after that when I just felt like I'm getting no's all over the place. And from what I understand, that's really about the deflating energy is really about me getting discouraged
That's
because
right.
of the no's and I'm losing the connection because we know spirit's always there
They're always there.
trying to communicate. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was because I was not feeling well, whatever it was. But then there's that thing where you get the no's and then it's too many no's. And then you start to think, oh my God, I'm off. I'm sick. I'm not getting this. What if I can't come up with anything? And that's when you go into your thinking brain.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where things like just recalling that sensation of the
Yeah.
yawn, just resetting. And when you're developing, you I think our sitters are more forgiving.
Yes.
It's a different story if you have someone paying for a reading, but there's nothing wrong with just saying, just a moment, I want to get this right, need to reset, whatever it is. But it's allowing your brain to slow down, because remember, the brain waves we saw in that EEG diagram. But the thinking brain, the speaking brain, is, if you look at the hertz, the frequency is between 20 to 40. And that's just everyday awareness, consciousness, talking, communicating with someone. And then we have to slow down to about 7 to 13 hertz. That's where mediumship, inspiration happen. And what happens though, we get that little bloop of information, but then we go, what? I need to
Yep.
think about it. What does this mean? I'm going to look a fool. I can't say that. I'm a fraud, whatever it is that you begin thinking, and it knocks you out. So what you have to be able to do is get to the point where you're like, all right, okay, if it's not mom, I'm sorry about that. I must have made a mistake. But I do feel these qualities about lovingness. I do feel as though like you would have spent a lot of time around her. So you build the power again by taking that pause. That's something that when I first started, I would just spew as much as I could,
Hmm.
and I would go as quickly as I could, because that's what I was taught. I heard from James Van Prague and others saying, "Oh, you ever see a medium? They're bouncing all over the place and they're so high energy and blah 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 blah
Yeah.
blah." And that didn't work for me. That may be their style. It may work for them. For me, that was detrimental, and so I had to learn to go deliberately slower
Hmm.
and with shorter amount of words. I try to do this. I said this in class the other day. Try to make your statements 10 words or less
Hmm.
and get a validation, because about 7 to 10 words is all you can really remember
Right.
as you're trying to remember what I just said.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Very good advice.
And in the case of your psychic amnesia client, she didn't
Hmm.
know. So you weren't getting the information wrong, but it was just out of her awareness. She wasn't able to process it. Whereas if I had to do this, I had to learn this for myself. If I say things slower or with a little bit more deliberate choice of
Hmm.
words, it actually allows me to stay in that space of awareness where I can still talk, but I'm going at a slower pace so that I don't bloop, go into the thinking part and stay there. So I really encourage developing mediums to get in the habit of choosing shorter phrases
Hmm.
of 10 words or less, because that will help you stay in that zone of 7 to 13, 14 hertz, and allow the spirit to come forward and give you information and insight while still speaking to
Right.
your sitter.
Was there ever a time when you began this where you felt you had to close your eyes to do it? I watch you read and you have your eyes open, as many mediums I've seen
Right.
do. I'm still in that thing where I gotta I gotta go within sometimes.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, professional mediums, is that a choice, or is it something, is it a newbie thing? Um, yeah.
When I started off, I would do that.
Yeah.
But what I had to learn to do is kind of have a soft focus. So my eyes
Mhm.
are open, but like I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm not focused on anything. So if you've ever done one of those 3D magic eye
Mhm.
books, I've never been able to do one,
Yeah, me neither.
but it's that same principle of just kind of letting your eyes relax and just kind of soft focus. So when you see me demonstrate, um, I'm I'm looking off, or I'm looking at the floor. Some people are rolling their eyes. That actually is a technique to slow down the brain waves. This is also another low brain factoid here. If you go uh, about 10-15 degrees, so what's 10-15 degrees above the horizon, if you were to imagine like an apple at an arm's length out,
Mhm.
just above the apple would be about 10, 15, 20 degrees above the horizon. And that location is actually, it's been shown to slow down to get you into the alpha brain waves. So
Oh.
looking at, like, some people are looking like they're They're going to pump their
Yeah.
eyes behind their
Yeah,
skulls.
which isn't comfortable to do.
Doesn't look comfortable. No, of course not. It doesn't feel good. So, but I had to learn to just kind of have that soft gaze in the eyes where I'm not really focused on anything. Things are there, of course,
Yeah.
but my awareness isn't focusing on
Your
anything.
awareness is in your soul awareness, I suppose,
That's
instead
right.
of
And
through
that
your eyes.
salient network.
Yeah. I actually watched an interview with somebody who I believe wrote a book. You may know of this person who was an EMDR
Oh
specialist.
yeah.
So he
Uh-huh.
did rapid eye movement to help trauma survivors and to help people heal their trauma. And he found that through doing rapid eye movement, a lot of them connected with the other side without meaning to. And so he did discover that there's something with eye movement that does whatever to the brain that opens up that part of the brain that you were speaking of
That's right.
earlier.
It's called the parietal lobe, and
Parietal lobe.
that area of the mind is our orientation part of the brain. So
Oh,
it tells me I'm sitting in a chair. It tells me that this is in front of me. It tells me that the clock is behind me. So it gives us our spatial awareness. And there have actually been several studies I came across that was comparing mediums and schizophrenics and their eye movement,
oh,
and it went a little bit farther talking about dissociation of the clients, but the subjects. But it was interesting that you bring that up because that actually has been studied with mediums about the eye movement.
well, yeah, it's all so interesting. And this has been such a fascinating conversation. I thank you so much for sharing
Oh, my
all of what
pleasure.
you've learned and sharing it with us. And that's just a teaser because I definitely want to recommend studying with you for developing mediums. And I know that you also have a group. Is it called the Sixth Sense?
The sixth
The
sense,
Sixth
yeah.
Sense. I'm a voice actor. I should be able to say that, but it's difficult. And that's a group of you that perform live, and obviously not now. Are you doing that by Zoom these
We
days?
Right, we do these demonstrations on Zoom right now, and because there have been times where we've only had four or maybe five of us because people are traveling, or like
Mhm.
we had one who's now moved to I think the Virgin Islands or something
Oh,
like that,
yeah.
or people just aren't available because of
Yeah.
other commitments. But we do demonstrate fairly regularly. One of my colleagues, Megan Elisa. She and I are demonstrating this weekend. Um,
Oh, fantastic.
we're doing a demonstration together, and the uh, the classes are weekly. I do a weekly class, and then every other Sunday I do a mediumship mechanics class. So there's lots going on and lots of ways to connect. You can find it on my website, alanwellmanmedium.com. There's also a Facebook group called Mediumship Development and Spiritual Unfoldment, and that's where I list a lot of the classes
That's
that I
great. And I'm going to be linking, putting the links down below. But
perfect.
I just want to thank you so much for your time and energy and for really articulately and eloquently sharing your insight about all this stuff. I find it so interesting, and I think that our viewers will too. So, um, just really want to thank you again. And
Oh,
this has
my
been a
pleasure.
really, really, this has actually been one of my favorite conversations. So, I look forward to continuing to study it with you and recommend you as a teacher and as a medium to anyone who's interested.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun. It's fun to share this stuff. I hope it's helpful, and
It is helpful.
I hope that it brings mediumship, if mediumship training to a new level when we start to look at all of these connections between the brain science, the spirituality, and the skill development of mediumship.
Yeah, and it does make it more accessible to those people who um, I don't want to say are non-believers because I think non-believers won't even go as far as to look into the studies, but I think it does make it more accessible to your average agnostic who's open-minded about it. But it always helps in me included. I was always agnostic until later in life. And I think I always needed to see, I'm like, show me the science. What are the physics? What's the science? And then, or having experienced it myself. So I think that's a really great way to open it up to people who are more, quote unquote, what is it? Right brained. I always forget which is which, but the more logical minded people. I have cat
Right.
hair up flying about. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Alan. It's a
My
pleasure,
pleasure.
and I look forward to studying with you again very soon.
All right. Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks.